Hi, everyone, and welcome to the KIX Symposium, reflecting on progress and looking towards the future. We're happy that you could join us today for this 90-minute exploration into key milestones achieved and to come for the Global Partnership for Education, Knowledge and Innovation Exchange, also known as KIX. My name is Tiffany Barnes-Huggins, and I manage the communications and knowledge translation activities for KIX, and I will be your host for the symposium today. KIX is a joint endeavor between the Global Partnership for Education and the International Development Research Center, and its purpose is to contribute to the improvement of education policy and practice in the Global South. KIX has been around for a little over a year now, and some of you may have already learned about the initiative through our calls for proposals, recently launched website, or the KIX annual report, which we released this summer. By attending this symposium, we hope that you will gain a better understanding of what KIX is and how it works, and identify opportunities for collaboration and knowledge exchange in the initiative. This is our first symposium, and we look forward to more opportunities to exchange knowledge moving forward. We will kick off this webinar with opening remarks from the leaders of IDRC and GPE. Following this, you will hear from different members of the KIX team, as well as project partners, about the key mechanisms of the initiative, newly funded projects, and the priorities for the coming year. Please note that this event will be recorded, and we will email the recording to registrants following the symposium. We will also post the recording on the KIX website, which is www.gpekix.org. This event also includes simultaneous interpretation in French and Spanish. Lastly, as an employee at Canada's International Development Research Centre, I would just like to say how pleased we are to be hosting this symposium. For those of you who don't know much about us, IDRC is part of Canada's foreign affairs and development efforts. We provide resources and funding for research in the Global South to promote the growth, reduce poverty, and drive large-scale positive change. So without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to the president of IDRC, Mr. Jean Lebel, to provide the first set of opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good day, everyone, and thank you to the Global Partnership Education and particularly its CEO, Alice Albright, that is with us this morning. Good morning, Alice. How are you? Good. Listen, I'm the president of IDRC. I'm based here in Ottawa, and it's truly a pleasure to be launching this first symposium of the KIX platform. At IDRC, we are quite thankful that GPE and IDRC has joined forces with all your membership at GPE to be able to run this KIX and to make it a valuable asset that is in straight line with the history of IDRC and education. Over the last 50 years, we're celebrating 50 years of existence this year. IDRC always had an eye on education in multiple ways and form. But with the Global Partnership of Education, we are, to a certain extent, renewing our vows and putting a large investment of our resources, time and money, as well as the resources of GPE into building up this platform. It's a strong signal of Canada that has been a partner since 2007, and it's a great example of IDRC support that builds this platform to amplify and mobilize knowledge for development in the education sector. We believe that KIX set the stage for long-term sustainable effort in education. All of you that are in the virtual space might ask yourself, well, what is ultimately the knowledge and innovation exchange, and what is it designed to achieve? Well, ultimately, it is designed to assure that children have access to quality education, and that there is a vibrant community of researcher and policy actors that have quality evidence to make the system better, the education system better, and to make it having impact at different scale, be it local, regional, national, and even through the exchange at the international level. We're supporting through the KIX platform applied knowledge building that is directly relevant and pressing that is directly relevant to pressing national and international issue. And we do this, as I mentioned, by linking decision maker to the work of researcher in order to amplify the exchange and makes solution better. It's already happening. Meetings have been taking place in the regional hubs since April. We've been hearing what stakeholder sees as national priority, and we have therefore been able to set our own priority. We, with KIX, are identifying what works, what needs improvement, and even what does not work, because after all, it is research and we are seeking to find the best solution. Now, let me close by reminding everyone that the COVID-19 that gave us the opportunity to be on this virtual symposium has also had major impact on children all over the world. It's estimated there's about 1.5 billion children that don't have access to school now because of the COVID-19. It's serious. Future of generation is at stake with this COVID crisis. The challenge that we are facing with this pandemic is now putting a new light and showing even more the importance of having these platforms where we can continue to work, where we can continue to learn, and where we can continue to discuss what are the options available for future generation. As we have seen, pandemics is there. We don't know when it will be resolved. But for sure, we don't want to lose any ground on education, and we need to find solutions that match this new challenge. In closing, I hope that you're going to have, the opportunity to have vibrant exchange, to reflect on your own experience, and also to debate on what are the best way forward. It is a pleasure for me and all my colleagues at IDRC to participate with the Global Partnership on Education to this journey and to this virtual symposium of the KIX platform. I'm wishing you all the best, and I'm really looking forward to the result of those conversations in this virtual symposium. And without any further ado, I will thank you and pass the baton to my colleague and friend, Alice Albright. Alice is the CEO of the Global Partnership on Education. She's in Washington, and we are welcoming you. Thank you for being with us, Alice, and thank you to all the GPE membership for supporting this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean, for that very warm welcome. And let me say hello to all of our dear friends at IDRC. We have been so delighted to be able to work so closely with you on getting KIX off the ground. It's just a thrill. And in fact, it couldn't be more timely given all that's going on. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll just make a few very brief comments, and I know that Trisha and Ian and many others will be going into quite a bit more detail, but just a bit. First of all, for those who are less familiar with GPE, we are a multi-stakeholder partnership, and we mobilize global and national investments to bring partners together to work on education and improve the delivery of education. And we are a grant maker in education. We provide significant grant funding to about 70 countries to help them develop and implement quality education to everyone in their countries. KIX is our approach, as Jean has said, to connecting expertise, innovation, and knowledge across the partnership and take advantage of all of the talent and the intellectual resource that is within the partnership. Zooming out a little bit, one of the things that occurred to us in thinking about KIX was that if you compare the education sector to many other sectors, the amount of funding that is invested in knowledge exchange in education, relatively speaking, if you compare it to health, for example, is quite a bit lower. And so we thought about that and thought, how could we work on putting a platform together to dedicate some money specifically to knowledge exchange? So we've now done that, and we've now done that with the creation of KIX, and we're delighted to be working with IDRC on it. At the moment, KIX is funded at $76.5 million, and so it stands out, certainly in terms of its size, as one of the largest platforms of its kind. Specifically, it helps governments and national partners generate, share, and use knowledge to adapt and scale innovations and strengthen capacities in ministries to work on policy challenges. So you can tell already what a vital resource it is. And one of the things that we're particularly excited about is it really connects knowledge at the global level with what the demand is at the local level. We did a big call for proposals when we were at the beginning stages of KIX to find a great partner, and we have found a great partner in the form of IDRC, and could not be happier about that. And there's been an enormous amount of work behind the scenes, putting it all together. And I've been watching it very closely because I sit next to Ian Mcpherson in our office, or I used to when we were in our office. And I would always knock on his door saying, Ian, how's it going? And Aditi, his colleague, and I was always so happy to sort of hear how it was going, because it was going quite well. Very specifically, the KIX team has made some remarkable progress. They've established 4 hubs across the globe that bring together regional partners. Ian will tell you where the hubs are, but they sort of span across GPE's footprint. We've also deployed $24 million to 12 global grants, a further $21 million to Southern-based organizations. And so there's been a significant amount of progress in putting together what I call the sort of operational footprint of KIX. And it's been, I think, all of the very careful work that's been done to get that in place has really contributed to sort of the credibility and the legitimacy of KIX. And I think it is now becoming well understood in terms of how it works. And I expect, and Ian will talk more about this, that KIX will have a very important role in understanding what is necessary to respond to COVID. So I won't talk about that, Ian will. Just to slightly shift gears to give you a little bit of information about what GPE as a partnership is doing about COVID. Of course, everybody knows that the school closures that have been necessary to contend with the health aspects of COVID have been unprecedented. And at its height, there were 1.6 billion children that were out of school. GPE watched this in early March and said, this is about to wind into a massive education crisis. So we mobilized very quickly, and we mobilized over $500 million to help countries develop their own response plans to COVID. Thus far, I have approved $430 million of funding to 54 countries to help them contend with the impacts that COVID will have on education. Very broadly, the money will go into 4 different areas. One is to help countries explore distance learning in a way that is relevant to the technology landscape in the countries. It tends to be more medium and low tech. It helps marginalized children, particularly girls, who we know will be particularly impacted in terms of their ability to continue to go to school. It will help countries reopen their school systems safely when they're able to do so, and help build further resilience to, unfortunately, what we expect to be future crises. So a lot going on. We can see that COVID, I think, underscores the need to continue to invest in innovation and scalability, and how solutions can be researched to help countries contend with crises such as COVID. And in many ways, this is the DNA. This is the DNA of KIX. So Ian will get into more about that in the future. I think what we've seen, certainly in the last 3 months, but we've also had heard it multiple times from the ministers of GPE beforehand, is how much the countries want to transform education, whether or not it's curriculum, whether or not it's blended learning, whether or not it's distance learning, whether or not it's teacher training. And so KIX is going to have a vital role to play in its 6 domain areas about the whole topic of transformation of education. GPE right now is in a strategic planning process. We're nearly at the end of it. It's been, I think, a very rich process. But if I were to summarize our new theme and objective, it's transforming education. We've just rebranded ourselves. That's what Our name is GPE, Transforming Education. And so KIX is going to have an absolutely vital role in how we pursue that hope, transforming education. So you all will be very busy, and we will very much look forward to working with you and getting all of the different bits and pieces of KIX out there. And I come back to the notion that the education sector has underinvested in knowledge. I hope KIX will change that. It's something that is vitally needed. It was vitally needed before COVID. It is absolutely vitally needed with COVID. And I expect that a lot of the lessons that we will have learned through the COVID period will continue, as many of the good ideas will continue to be of interest to our country partners. So let me stop there. I want to, before I turn it over to Trisha, there's been a lot of what I would call very nitty-gritty work done in the past months to get KIX off the ground. This is, behind the scenes, I would call it unsung hero work. And I would like to genuinely thank everybody that has been involved in really getting all the nitty-gritty together, because it is going to really prove the test of time about how valuable KIX is. So thank you to everybody on that. And Trisha, I'm going to turn it over to you, Trisha Wind. She's the program lead for KIX at the IDRC. We've loved getting to know you and working with you. And let me turn it over to you, and thank you all very much for putting this all together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean and Alice, for opening this first KIX Symposium. It's my job to give a brief overview of what KIX has accomplished so far since it officially started in 2019. If we can go to the next slide, please. So KIX is the knowledge and innovation exchange of and for the countries that are supported through the Global Partnership for Education. KIX's purpose is to generate and mobilize evidence to strengthen those countries' education systems. And our first year, as Alice just said, was really focused on getting the building blocks in place, filling out the team, just starting to facilitate the inter-country learning and launching the first set of projects. Throughout, we wanted to maintain 4 core principles. First, that KIX is country-driven. Second, that we allocate funding through fair, transparent, and competitive processes. Third, that KIX be adaptive and responsive, especially to country needs, but also to changing contexts. And 4, that we complement and reinforce other GPE mechanisms and practices. KIX has 2 interconnected functions, as you'll see on this next slide. KIX facilitates the direct knowledge exchange that you've already heard about. So 4 regional hubs bring together education system stakeholders of GPE member countries to identify common challenges, to generate and share evidence and ideas. And when I looked at the registrants for today's symposium, I noticed a number of people who are in fact active participants in these regional KIX hubs. So a special welcome to you today to this global symposium. KIX also has a funding mechanism to build and mobilize evidence for education. And a set of global projects started this year, another set will start next year. And again, if I looked at the registrant list for this symposium, I noticed a lot of researchers, NGOs, multilaterals, and other organizations who do education and education research work. The next slide. Our first priority was to operationalize the regional knowledge and innovation hubs. An open competitive process called for organizations who could facilitate that peer learning across countries. So this map shows the 4 regional hubs and the organizations who are leading them. In Latin America and the Caribbean, it's led by SUMA, an education research and innovation lab, working with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. In Africa, there are 2 different hubs. One is led by UNESCO's International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, working with UNICEF's regional office in Nairobi and the African Union. And the other is led by l'Institut de la Francophonie pour l'éducation et la formation, or IFEF, la Conférence des ministères de l'éducation des États et gouvernements de la francophonie, et l'Agence universitaire de la francophonie. Finally, NORAG, a global network focused on education, is leading the hub that covers the GPE member countries from across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. So the hubs share the same broad objectives, but their strategies are tailored to the unique characteristics of the regions in which they're working and the strengths of each organization. And we're going to hear from each of them in a moment. The grants to the hubs started on April 1st of this year, just as education systems across the world shut down because of COVID-19. And I sort of wondered whether KIX should proceed or maybe just press pause. We had all planned big international inception meetings and air travel had just completely shut down. IFEF actually put the question to their first meeting of education stakeholders when they started. And the feedback from that meeting, echoed from across IDRC and GPE, was that we should just keep going. So I'm sure, as everybody who's on the symposium also needed to do, we all shifted immediately to virtual strategies and we forged ahead. Now, KIX is a voluntary invitation. Country participation is voluntary. So even prior to COVID, we anticipated that not all countries would engage, or maybe not right away. So we've been pleased that already 70% of countries have had representatives in hub events. Moreover, each hub started by engaging 1 or 2 people in ministries of education, but the vision was that each country would identify a group of up to 5 people from both the ministry and the local education groups who would be a national delegation that would link KIX knowledge sharing back and forth into national processes. Many countries have already identified this group of people, and the hub participant count is already over 500 when we look across the events. So hubs are facilitating conversations across countries. For example, in a meeting of Africa 19, representatives from Kenya and Rwanda were comparing notes on competency-based learning assessment. A Zambian representative shared strategies for promoting gender equality in education policy. So that knowledge exchange is happening. Now, of course, online meetings have many limitations compared to the in-person events that we had planned, but early KIX engagements showed us that they can work. And they have certainly showed us how our strategies need to be further refined because we're going to be in this COVID context for a long time. The next slide. So last year, KIX also launched a call for projects to build and mobilize evidence on foundational topics for the success of education systems. 180 proposals came in. KIX's budget would have let us fund 6 of them. However, seeing that there were so many high quality proposals, the GPE board agreed to an early supplement for KIX, so we could double that number. So 12 projects are starting just a few months ago, and this slide shows the interconnected topics that they're focusing on. Half of them either focus directly on or include elements of teacher professional development. For example, looking for cost-effective options so that education systems can incorporate better systems for teacher mentoring and monitoring. Some of them are looking at digital and blended learning approaches, including a project that's specifically focused on refugee children and displaced populations. We're funding a project that's geared to helping countries integrate early childhood care and education more fully into their education sector planning. 3 focus on strengthening the use of data in education systems, and others are looking at how to scale up community-based initiatives into education, for instance, for preschool, for literacy, for helping communities understand whether children are getting their early math skills and what to do about it. Next slide. So each project involves at least 3 GPE member countries, and some of them are involving more. So in total, across the 12 projects, there are activities in 42 of GPE's 68 member countries. 34 organizations are involved, including 12 based in the Global South. And each project includes a strong focus on gender equality, equity, and inclusion, which are core values of IDRC, the Global Partnership, and of course, throughout KIX. And finally, KIX is interested not just in identifying good ideas or pilot projects, but really understanding what it takes to scale the impact of proven or promising approaches in the particular country context that are supported through GPE. And some of those are fairly challenging contexts. So that's a theme in each of the projects. And in addition, we're funding a separate project that's really just looking at scaling and what we can learn about scaling. So it's working with a set of KIX projects and engaging with education system stakeholders to build our understanding and our capacity to scale positive impact. So these projects started a few months ago, but they might be of interest even now before their early outputs are coming out, because each is built to further adapt and investigate the scalability of proven educational innovation. So you can find out more on our website, and we're going to hear from 2 of these projects in just a moment. Next slide. As hubs started engaging countries, they sought to identify the shared policy challenges in the region, because those would shape the hub's own knowledge sharing agenda and inform KIX's regional calls for proposals. So hubs analyzed education sector plans, they looked at regional analyses, and they engaged with country representatives to ask what were their top issues of their education systems. 627 people replied to Hub surveys and interviews. And for any of you wishing to see a 2020 stock taking of key priorities for education in low and lower middle income countries, I would encourage you to look at the reports that the Hub's produced just in the past couple of weeks. This slide just shows one example. In the Africa 21 region, the key topics in our call for proposals come out of that Hub paper. We're looking to mobilize and build evidence about pre and in-service teacher training and development, offering chances for children and youth who are out of school, whether because of conflict, marginalization, or because of COVID-19, how to promote gender equality and girl success in school, and how to support mother tongue instruction, moving into quality bilingual and plurilingual education. So one of the calls already closed last week, and 3 of them are still open. Proposals must be led by Southern organizations that are based in the regions covered by the call, but they can submit also on behalf of consortia that include organizations from within or outside the region. So if you're interested in applying, please take a look at the KIX website and the IDRC funding page. We would really love to hear from you. The impact of COVID-19 is embedded in the topics of the regional calls. And in addition, we realize, though, that KIX should also directly address the pandemic. So you'll hear more about the COVID Observatory project that KIX is funding in just a moment. Final slide. So there's a lot more information about this on our website. Tiffany already mentioned the URL, gpekix.org. And I hope that gives you a sense of what KIX has been up to. It's been a very full period, and the last 6 months have been challenging for everyone. This is just a beginning, and we know that nothing is perfect. But we are heartened that countries are connecting via KIX. And I think even more, we're grateful for the commitment and vision of our project partners to continue moving forward. If they didn't want to do this, there would be no way that they could do it from their homes in Ethiopia, in Dakar, in all the places in the world in which they've also been working from home. So it has been a delight to meet this new group of partners who is making KIX happen, and it's time we heard from them. Back to you, Tiffany.
Thank you, Trisha, for the excellent overview of the progress that KIX has made in the past year. And thanks again, Alice Albright and Jean Lebel, for your great opening remarks. So in this next session, titled Keeping KIX on Track in a COVID-19 Context, we will hear from project partners and hubs about their experience in the initiative and how the current global pandemic has affected their work. We will start by showing you a short video with representatives from the 4 regional KIX hubs, and following this, we will have a panel discussion with partners from 3 KIX-funded projects. In the video, you will hear first from Victoria Chisachi Kanobe, Senior Program Coordinator for UNESCO's International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, as well as the KIX Africa 19 focal point. Next in the video, you'll hear Raul Chacon, who is the director of the KIX Hub for Latin America and the Caribbean. Following that, you will hear from Dr. Maimona Sissoko Touré, who is the coordinator for the KIX Africa 21 Hub. And lastly, you will hear from Jose Luis Canelas, who is the KIX EAP Hub Manager. So without further ado, we will play this short 5-minute video for you.
Since its inception in April 2020, the KIX Africa 19 Hub has engaged with all the 19 countries who have nominated their focal points and have validated the country needs and priorities. The Hub has held at least 2 meetings every month and has also engaged with the GPE focal points and local education groups. This has been a great opportunity to foster country ownership and visibility of the Hub. The advent of the COVID-19 pandemic has, however, slowed down the responsiveness and participation of some country focal points in the KIX Hub activities as well as online meetings. The pandemic has also created the need to strengthen teachers' competences in the use of ICTs for teaching and learning and assessment, given that most learners are out of school. This has also created the need to devise new strategies to reach out to the marginalized children who are completely missing out on education.
In the context of COVID-19, and recognizing that we are living in extremely challenging times, we at SUMA and OECS are very pleased to share with you that the KIX Hub for Latin America and the Caribbean already has 35 representatives from the 8 country partners of the Global Partnership for Education. Amazingly, the members of this KIX Regional Hub are working in different institutions and environments, such as the Ministry of Education, national NGOs, Teachers Union, and academia. The most notorious impact of COVID-19 has been on national education budgets, with the reallocation of public resources from the sector to support other social and economic challenges. In the context of the pandemic, the education sector is reinforcing previous priorities, such as the teacher professional development, initiatives like teacher training on distance learning, and the pedagogical use of information and communication technologies, or monitoring the learning progress of every student through the design and implementation of educational leveling plans to face the growing learning gaps of the most vulnerable. Finally, countries are also tackling the challenges imposed by COVID by first addressing the overall well-being of students and teachers.
Dans le cadre de la mise en place du Centre KIX Afrique 21, nous avons enregistré une participation active des pays membres et une forte demande de la nécessité d'avoir un espace d'échange et de collaboration entre les pays et avec le Centre KIX Afrique 21. La pandémie de la Covid-19 nous a donné l'opportunité de réévaluer les priorités dans le secteur de l'éducation, comme les problématiques de l'égalité des genres, comme la problématique de la formation des enseignants pour l'acquisition, par exemple, des compétences clés dans le domaine du numérique afin d'assurer, n'est-ce pas, la continuité pédagogique.
We are having a very positive response. More than half of the 21 countries have already a KIX steering committee, with about 70 representatives from governments and education stakeholders. Some encouraging feedback. From Asia and Pacific, we heard this project is responding to their pressing needs. In Europe and Central Asia, there is confidence in what we are doing and how we are doing it. We confirm the importance of languages in our hub, especially the use of Russian and Arabic. COVID-19 and its impact on the education sector has emerged as a priority area. Countries have had to come with imaginative solutions and learn by doing. There is consensus on the need to share this effort with all education stakeholders. We know COVID has exacerbated education inequalities. Leaving no one behind is an absolute priority that goes beyond this crisis and is at the heart of our work to strengthen education systems and to promote and protect the right to education.
All right, thank you to the Hub representatives for participating in this film. We appreciate all the great work you've been putting in, and despite the unprecedented circumstances, you're still kind of getting up and running, so we're really appreciative of that. We'll now turn to a panel discussion led by my colleague Florencio Ceballos, who is the Senior Program Specialist for the Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. He will introduce you to the panelists, and he'll let you know how to ask questions while the panel takes place. Over to you, Florencio.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. The next panel is aiming to discuss how KIX has been keeping on track despite or within the COVID-19 context. In order to do that, we have three panelists that will share their experiences and their perspectives with us. Victoria Trinio, all the way from Manila, Philippines, is the Executive Director of the Foundation for Information Technology, Education and Development, FIT-ED, part of the Teacher Professional Development at Scale Coalition, and leading the TPD at Scale program. Renaud Comba is a research manager for the Data Must Speak initiative within KIX with UNICEF Innocenti in Florence, Italy. And he is currently, if I understand correctly, based in Aix-en-Provence. And finally, from Abidjan, Ivory Coast, Shem Okorebodo, Senior Program Officer at ADEA and part of the COVID-19 Observatory project focused on West Africa. Welcome, Victoria, Renaud, and Shem. Before starting with the questions, I would just like to explain very quickly how the question and answer process will go for the public. You will have the opportunity to make questions, to ask questions to the panelists that will be responded at the end of the panel. And we'll try to respond as many as possible. In order to submit questions, you will have to click on the participate button on the top of the webcast player, enter your email address, and write your question in the space provided and press send. Always press the send. And you don't have to wait until the end to submit your questions. You can start submitting those as we speak, and we will collecting those and responding them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Victoria, Renaud, and Shem, and ask maybe a first question to the three of them, and starting with Victoria. I would like you, for the three of you, to give a quick overview of what your project is aiming to achieve. What is the context in which the research occurs? Perhaps based on those different contexts, give us a bit of an understanding on how the project has been affected by COVID-19 during those months. So, Victoria, let's start with you.
Thank you, Florencio, and good day to everyone. And thank you for having me on this panel. As you said, we're running a global grant project called Adopting and Scaling Teacher Professional Development Approaches in Ghana, Honduras, and Uzbekistan. The aim of our project is to contextualize, customize, test, and continuously improve upon proven models of teacher professional development, or TPD, that use information and communication technology in some way and are designed to achieve quality teacher learning at scale, what we call TPD at scale, with an @ sign. So the research will be investigating equity, quality, and efficiency issues as we adapt and scale in 3 diverse contexts in each country, drawing insights and lessons that would be meaningful for GPE and non-GPE countries across regions. So Honduras, Ghana, and Uzbekistan are all in the midst of education reform. Enhancing the quality of teaching through strengthening TPD is a common goal. However, they are at differing stages of development in terms of TPD at scale. So in the Honduras Ministry of Education, for example, has established an online platform intended to enable continuous TPD. And it envisions creating regional networks of teachers engaged in professional learning communities, trained and supported through online and blended learning strategies. And it has currently the capability to deliver online courses and has experimented with blended learning models, although not yet in any rigorous or structured way. Now, on the other hand, in Ghana, in-service training is principally still cascaded face-to-face at district, cluster, and school levels. To support continuous TPD, teachers have been mandated to form school-based professional learning communities, and their education sector plan sets targets for strengthening instructional leadership at school and district levels to support teacher learning. Finally, Uzbekistan does not currently have a formal system for continuous TPD. Mandatory in-service training is taken by teachers once every 5 years, face-to-face, followed by 178 hours of distance training and culminating in a formal exam. So their ESP, their education sector plan, notes that this system disincentivizes teachers to do TPD outside of the formal training system and at their personal expense, and recognizes the need for a more flexible approach to in-service training. So all three target countries and the 5 other countries where our technical leads and experts are were in various stages of lockdown when the project started in April. One positive note is that remote learning is front of mind for everyone, all of the governments. So interest in effective online and blended models has sharpened. But in terms of project implementation, we have had to adjust our work plan to account for disruptions and work slowdowns, essentially extending year 1 activities by 2 months. The key challenges that quickly I'll just mention: onboarding country teams, formalizing agreements with governments, and forming national steering committees through GP's legs, the local education groups, took more time for the expected reasons. And all our planned face-to-face meetings and events had to be done virtually instead. So we canceled the global meeting that would have brought the country teams together. And at the country level, there have been scheduling connectivity issues with some stakeholders. Finally, data gathering for our first research piece, country assessments of the TPD system and readiness for ICT-mediated TPD, all have had to be done remotely. So let me stop there. Back to you, Florencio.
Thank you very much, Victoria. We'll go next with Renaud. The same question. Give us a quick overview of the project and the context in which it's developing and how COVID has affected the start of your project. Over to you, Renaud.
Sure. Merci, Florencio, and thank you to GP and IDRC for having UNICEF Innocenti on this panel. So the Data Must Speak, or DMS, is an initiative that has been implemented by UNICEF since 2014. This initiative provides country-specific technical support and capacity strengthening to ministries of education for more effective and transparent data use at community, school, and system level. And since 2019, DMS also now includes a brand new research component whose phase is co-funded by the KIX initiative. And so, as we all know, the global education sector is going through what we call a learning crisis. However, that being said, even in the most difficult contexts, they are the positive divine schools that outperform in terms of learning, gender, retention, and equity other schools which are operating in similar contexts and with equivalent level of resources. Therefore, the improved outcomes they achieved must be linked to practices, behaviors, gender and social norms in school management and pedagogical approaches, or even in relation to school through parental and community involvement. But unfortunately, most of the time, those positive divine schools are not even identified, and very little is known about what they are actually doing in school that works. And also, even less is known about the implementation gap in service delivery, which is to say how to incentivize and optimally scale up these positive practices and behaviors in the less performing schools. And so this research is a multi-country project. It's happening in 8 countries across 2 continents. And in all of those 8 countries, just like the rest of the world, the COVID-19 pandemic is making things a little bit harder, and it's making the political economy quite restrained. And so getting the attention of ministries of education officials has been quite challenging. However, thanks to UNICEF presence in the field with more than 900 education experts worldwide and our privileged connections with ministries of education, we haven't really felt consequential delays thus far. But we are paying very close attention to how we engage within country stakeholders. So, for example, how we are involving them, whether our asks and communication are clear, and how we can find a common ground on next step and timeline. Thanks, Florencio. Back to you.
Merci, Renaud. And last but not least, the same set of questions to our colleague Shem Okore-Bodo from ADEA in Abidjan. Over to you, Shem.
Thank you, Florencio. Through the $500,000 grant by GP and which is administered by IDRC, ADEA is developing a KIX observatory on COVID-19 responses in educational systems in Africa. And we are doing this in partnership with the African Union Center for Girls and Women's Education in Africa, CFA, and with technical support from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. The overall objective of this 18-month project is to collect, analyze, synthesize, and share information and evidence on COVID-19 policy and practice responses in primary and secondary education in the 40 GP member countries in Africa, with a deliberate focus on gender, equity, and inclusion in order to inform ongoing interventions and support education system resilience against future crises. This work is really taking place in a continent with one of the youngest populations, a continent with great diversity in terms of its countries and their populations, cultures and traditions, socioeconomic status, and education systems. It is also in a context where large proportions of the population seem to cope with the pace of technological changes much better than the custodians of the policies and frameworks guiding such changes. The common thread in this diversity, however, is the shared priority needs of African countries and the competition for the limited resources that are available, where countries really have to innovate within the challenges through out-of-the-box ideas in order to make things move and to ensure that the best interest of the child is paramount. And of course, embracing this vision is the Agenda 2063 vision of a united, peaceful, and developed Africa. Like other colleagues have mentioned, of course, the advent of COVID has seen us use different approaches in connecting and engaging with countries and partners. And of course, that means, for example, restricting meetings with policymakers and technocrats using virtual platforms and using more and more our networks and focal points within the countries. So that is how we have been able to also, adopt and adapt, to the changes due to COVID-19. Back to you, Florencio.
Thank you very much, Sam. So the next question is specific for each one of the panelists, and I would like again to start with Victoria. Here's the question for you. COVID has impacted your ability to conduct field work with teachers and schools communities, both in Honduras, Uzbekistan, and Ghana. Conducting research with the community on the field is becoming more difficult, and that is an aspect of your project, your research on TPD at scale. And I wonder, how have you adapted to that, to the difficulties or the impossibility to conduct research on the field with teachers and students and communities? Victoria.
Thank you, Florencio. That's a good question. So we've needed shorter, more frequent online meetings to build trust, which is really very important, and relationships across our partners. So planning has to be in stages, as it's not possible to know what will be feasible in a few months' time. So there's a lot of uncertainty over when schools will be reopening and if they will stay open, and if they're going to shift modality. So we've needed to be creative about how to reach research participants, exploring multiple avenues, and it's important to always have a backup plan. In terms of research instruments, we're thinking it's probably not ideal to do focus group discussions or group interviews, which was integral to our original research design, as there are too many issues around equity and participation and too much missed in terms of nonverbal cues when you're doing it online. So we have really been moved to doing online and phone surveys, but again, we need to keep them short because of bandwidth issues plus data costs. So that's also something that we need to be very alert to. Thank you, Florencio.
Thank you, Vicky. Rono, for you now and for the DataMastic project, which relies, as we know, on governments being able to produce and to use data, both EMIs and vital statistics of different sorts. And the question is, if you perceive that in the context of COVID, governments have changed their priorities as well as their ability to use data as a source of information in the decision-making process. Have you seen any change on that aspect that is central for DataMastic?
Yeah, that's a great question, Florencio. So like I previously said, the DMS research is investigating what works in positive divide in schools and how to optimally scale those good practices. And so to do so, we are going to lead different stages of this research. And the first two are going to be quantitative analysis by, just like you said, leveraging on administrative data sets such as MS, learning assessments and household surveys. And this analysis is going to allow us to identify contextual and resource factors that are influencing school performances, as well as identify positive divide in schools. And so this work needs to be done hand in hand with ministries of education as well as local education groups. This stage is not so much impacted right now by COVID-19, except for the fact that most ministries of education have stopped their MS data collection in early March. And so the research will have to work with older data sets, potentially from 2018 or even 2019, which is not what we were expecting at first. And later in 2020 and in early 2021, we're going to conduct fieldwork data collection in schools to identify the positive divide behaviors and practices that I mentioned before. But to do so, we will obviously continuously track the situation in each context and ensure that the risks are very low before launching the fieldwork.
Thank you very much, Renaud. And before we move to Shem, I just want to remind everyone to submit questions through the chat. Click on the participate button, enter your email, and submit your question in the space that's provided there, and send and press send. Shem, your project is a bit different because it was born and was created because of COVID. It's a COVID observatory for West Africa. And it's a recent project, so I do not expect nobody expects you to have like heavy evidence collected yet at this point. Nevertheless, I wonder if your project has been already able to identify at least what is the demand in terms of evidence related with COVID that ministries of education and other important stakeholders in the region are communicating. What type of evidence apparently they need, and also how do they need it? What are the formats, the ways in which this evidence could be more useful? Do you have any insight on that, Shem?
Thank you for that question, Florencio. Well, based on our initial engagement with countries since March, as part of our support to countries, the evidence that is emerging really points to the need to support countries to address challenges arising from COVID around education system issues. Here we are looking at issues around teacher preparation and support, issues around limited access to learning, having protected budget allocations for the sector and seeking alternative financing, issues around assessment, and challenges which we are seeing with preparations for reopening of schools, some guidance and some toolkits around that. And also, we also have issues around learner well-being, beyond learning, in the face of the negative consequences of school closures. And these include, issues around nutrition, because we have school feeding programs that are no longer going on, issues around learner health and overall well-being. And so with the gender equity and inclusion lens, the observatory will document, analyze, and synthesize, and really package some of these responses in a manner that can really inform the policymakers. That means we will use different modes, different models. At the same time, we are going to track and document emerging research and COVID-19 related tested and evaluated interventions, that target these issues. And then finally draw some promising practices based on case studies that we will undertake that have a strong potential to resonate with policymakers. It is good to point out, Florencio, that in this journey, we will of course collaborate closely with the two African regional KIX hubs, that is the KIX Africa 19 and KIX Africa 21 hubs, so that we can feed into each other's work because they've already started doing some work around these areas. So that really would be my response to your question. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Before we go to the questions from the participants from the public attending the meeting, I wonder and the question is for the three of you, if you see any commonalities, any common lessons emerging about conducting research and conducting successful projects on education in a context of pandemic. Do you see some common lessons that are emerging from those three very different contexts? A TPD at scale initiative in 3 countries, Data Must Speak initiative in 8 countries, and a regional observatory on COVID for West Africa. I don't know, Renaud, maybe you would like to start if you have any comments on this?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Florencio. And I think, hearing what Victoria and Sham have said, it just seems like all of the lessons that they have learned is also something that is extremely useful for the Data Must Speak project. I think as a result of the pandemic, what we're seeing is that ministries of education are temporarily shifting away from their long-term educational goal, as outlined in their GP education sector plans, onto more short-term, direct, actionable school reopening goals. However, in the case of the DMS project, we've been positively impressed, as it seems like the role and use of data is still one of the top priorities of various ministries of education. For example, in Nepal and Laos PDR, the DMS Research Technical Group within country partners have already been formed, timelines and work plans have already been designed and agreed upon, and the research has even been embedded within some of our beneficiary countries' education sector analysis. So I think that all of this is a really good sign that shows that even during a global health pandemic, the role of data and research are still priorities for education decision makers. Now, in terms of lesson learned, and we keep learning them, I think that there are some elements that we need to keep in mind as research is moving forward. For example, with how we communicate with ministries of education officials. I think we're seeing that many stakeholders are trying to engage with decision makers to implement COVID-19 response programs. And while research is critical for evidence-based programming, we should make a greater effort to coordinate smoothly between donors, development partners, and civil society organizations to make sure that, first, we don't reinvent the wheel. Second, we communicate clearly to decision makers. And third, we piggyback on what others the great work of others and as well as what already exists.
Thank you very much, Renaud. Victoria, do you have any comments on those common lessons?
Yes, I agree completely with everything that Renaud said. I think just to add to that, I think what the current situation has made even more apparent is the importance of building trust, which is what's underlying this all of the relationships, and making a concerted effort to ensure that despite the challenges and uncertainties arising from the pandemic, we are responsive to the context in which we're working, and everyone, the research participants and stakeholders, are fully engaged in the process and have a sense of ownership of the project. And so we are able to conduct high quality research that generates meaningful knowledge for the countries and the regions. Ultimately, I think we are meant to learn from the country stakeholders and to learn together with them and to help them to deal with the impact of the pandemic and beyond towards achieving their education sector goals. So we're not there to disrupt or to add more work, but to really be integrated into their short-term, medium-term, and long-term responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Shem, any comments? Any reflections?
Thank you, Florencio. I couldn't agree more with both Vicky and Renaud. And from where I stand, 4 things, come out. First, I think it is clear that there is a need to prepare our teachers better and address their safety and well-being. And this is really including the needs of those with pre-existing conditions at this time of COVID especially. And here we're also thinking around teachers who have really lost their jobs, from private schools, and also those who are employed by the school management boards. Secondly, I think we need to make sure that gender-sensitive approaches, especially focusing on the girl child, are really mainstreamed in our interventions, and that there's a deliberate focus on inclusion issues, looking at the needs of vulnerable groups, as well as those learners in marginalized communities. Thirdly, the issue of partnership has really proved to be central to the success of most of the country-level interventions, and this is something that should be embraced fully. Finally, and as Renaud has indicated, we need to relook at the role of education management information systems, especially around the management and utilization of data to inform future preparedness of the education sector so that we don't react to crises such as the COVID pandemic. Those really would be my takeaway. Thank you, Florencio.
Thank you, Sam. Now we have a few questions coming from the public here, and I will direct those questions to the panelists. A first question, and it's interesting because it has been one, I would say, of the trending topics in the education field during this pandemic, is the role and extent of blended distance learning and how blended distance learning is possible within models are possible within this context. I'm thinking specifically on what you, Shem, are hearing from your research on the observatory COVID, but maybe also Renaud and Vicky have some feedback on that. Do you see that emerging as a topic that is relevant, and how do you feel that could be incorporated, if so, blended distance learning models? Shem, maybe you?
Yeah, thank you, Florencio. I think this is a reality that we have to embrace. And why do I say this? What we are getting from the country feedback is that the current provisions of learning does not reach a good number of learners, because clearly, because of issues of infrastructure, issues of lack of access to ICT platforms, digital devices, etc., means that a large majority of numbers of learners are actually left behind at the current pace. And therefore, moving forward, I think we must use a multi-pronged approach in having learners access learning. And that means making use of both digital, traditional, including papers and televisions and radios. It is very clear that unless we go that route, we will not be able to achieve the level of access and, of course, quality that we are looking for. So I think the blended learning approach, to me, seems to be something that is positively coming out from the engagement with the countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Shem. I don't know if you have any other reactions on this question, or I should move to the next one. Okay.
Vicky here, Florencio.
Okay, sorry, Vicky, go ahead.
Just briefly, so this the online embedded models and a range of online embedded models at scale are precisely the focus of our project. And I would just like to say that a key issue is readiness. So before any government, what we advise is before any government plans out sort of the bouquet of, or the suite of modalities that they will roll out for their schools, they need to really look at their readiness, both the readiness at on the supply side, the delivery, the readiness of teachers, materials, assessments, and so on, and the readiness of the users, so the students, the households, parents, and so on. And yes, I agree completely with the idea that you need to have a range of possible options, modalities, so that you don't create a digital divide, and that your intervention isn't exclusionary. You don't want anyone left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. And actually, I will stay with you because the next question is specifically on TPD. The question says that in Asia, there is a great challenge in developing teachers' motivations for TPD or teachers' professional development. Many countries lack performance assessment systems in this context, how will TPD at scale overcome this challenge to achieve its objectives, despite the lack of motivation and performance assessment systems for TPD? Vicky, over to you.
Yes, so well, the situation across Asia is actually very diverse. Different countries are at different levels of the sort of development in terms of having the essential pillars for a strong and robust TPD system. So TPD at scale, it's the idea of that is finding the right models and adapting them to all the diverse range of contexts within a country, such that teachers are able to access TPD in whatever sort of the existing context of TPD that is provided by the TPD system. So we work within the existing systems of the countries, such that, for example, if their teachers are required to have a certain number of units for TPD every year or every 5 years, for example, and that they actually have the opportunity to acquire those units and in a way that ensures quality. So it's difficult to answer that question because the contexts are very different across the countries. But the idea is that the system has to be able to serve all. It has to be inclusive while ensuring quality, and it has to also be cost effective.
Thank you, Vicky. And Renaud, I have a question for you now. It's still early, but is there any data or evidence on how COVID-19 has affected the well-being of students and teachers, based on the data that you recollect as a result of the project, I imagine?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, my project, the DMS project, is again just leveraging on administrative data that were collected pre-COVID. But my office, the office of UNICEF Innocenti, is finalizing a policy brief on child well-being, and I think that a whole lot of evidence is pointing out that being in school is associated with improved child well-being outcomes, as well as a lower rate of adolescent pregnancy. We have evidence from the 2014-2016 Ebola outbreak in West Africa that shows that during this time there was an increase in adolescent pregnancy. I think there is a very good randomized control trial done by Oriana Bendiera from the LSC, and a decrease in the age of the first union, so an increase in child marriage. And then I think what we're seeing also is that Ebola-affected country, saw either a decrease or a plateau in their protection scores, which could be attributed to containment measures in which, perpetrators of violence were often very close with family members that were quarantined with children, for example. So, yeah, I mean, school closure, I think we don't have a whole lot of evidence, so not that I'm aware of, when it comes to this COVID-19 crisis, but when we take other health pandemics, such as the Ebola, we can really see that school closures is affecting children. And when it comes to teacher, I'm not really sure, and this is not my area of expertise, but yeah, if you want more information, I believe that you can go on the UNICEF Innocenti website. Thanks, Florencio.
Merci, Renaud. The next questions, I guess it could be for any of you, but I would say especially for Sham, given the COVID-19 Observatory Initiative. We are, all of us that have kids have discovered or are seeing the school in a very different lens as a result of the pandemic. Parents are now the first teachers. And the question is that if in light of COVID, there are any projects or initiatives that you are aware, would you consider involved that are focusing on making parents ready to, or better equipping parents to address the learning needs of their children, especially the younger children? Is there any initiative that you are aware? within your projects, or more broadly, and that's what I'm directing that to Shem, aiming to prepare parents to teach their children in the COVID context?
Yeah, thank you, Florencio. I mean, it is true that really parents are the first teachers, and especially that is becoming even more with the lower classes. From the engagement with countries that we have done, we do see some initiatives planned of involving parents more into the children's learning, especially the younger ones. For example, we do have the case of Rwanda, where the Ministry of Education has specifically tailor-made certain lessons, especially on TV, that also involve parents and also encourage parents to really link up with their children. We also have community-based approaches and support, especially in Rwanda, when you think around not only engaging with their children, but also even building schools, so that it is a shared arrangement. We also had some cases of South Africa and also in Mauritius. So those are really like the early evidences that we can talk about. But also going forward, as ADEA, we are in the process of developing a toolkit, what we call remote education toolkit, that can help really prepare the countries in case they need to use remote education in case of a crisis. And one of the elements that we have within that toolkit is the greater role of parents as teachers. So at the moment, we cannot say there is concrete evidence from our side. Indeed, parents are just going out of their way because they have the children. But I think this is something that we will need to track. And really, I think at one point we were even saying, should we not have even a curriculum for parents to better prepare them to be able to engage with the learners as teachers? Back to you.
Thank you very much, Shem. And my colleagues here on the chat remind me that one of KIX global projects on Unlock Learning with World Vision is about community-based early literacy as a topic. And this topic is even more relevant now and more timely given the COVID-19. You can find details about this project as well on our website. I think that we have 3-4 minutes left, and I have a quick question for you if you can address it. How would you say that success looks like for your project in the future, and especially within this new context of the pandemic? If you can give us a quick hint on how success looks like for your project. Vicky, maybe you want to start?
Sure. For right now, I would say success would be for us to be able to actually do our field research in 2021. That's the immediate concern. So everything is sort of up in the air, and we're planning sort of month by month, week by week. We have all our fingers and toes crossed. We're cautiously confident that we can do it, but we shall see.
Thank you, Vicky. Anyone else would like to reflect on that?
Sure, I can give a very quick insight about what we would consider success for the Data Must Speak project. I think it would be, even though we are in the middle of a global health pandemic, I think it would be to make sure that our guiding principles, of learning by doing, of sustainability, of not one size fit all, and demand-driven kind of all fits together and just works, so that we continue working hand in hand with ministries of education, so that we can achieve this research. Indeed, field work it might be challenging, but again, KIX projects are, kind of long-lasting. So hopefully by 2021 or even 2022, we'll be able to go on the field and collect data. So hopefully everything will be a success.
Thank you. Shem, any final reflection on how success looks like?
Yeah, I think maybe in terms of the early days, what we could say is that we For us, since we engage a lot with policymakers, what we will probably do is during one of our high-level engagements, we will need to see to what extent the policymakers are indicating that the information and the evidence that we put out there for them was able to influence changes in their policies so that they can better, prepare for the COVID-19 and address some of the challenges that they're currently facing. That would really be the start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shem. Now I would like to thank all our panelists for their insight and sharing their experience and the knowledge with us. And thanks to the participants and the questions from the public. And now I would like to hand the microphone to my colleague Joy Nafungo for the next section, which is looking towards the future. Thank you very much. And Joy, over to you.
Thank you, Florencio. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So we heard from Trisha about what KIX has been working on this past year. And my work here is to pick up from where she left as we look towards the future of KIX. To start off, let me state that year 2 will be busy for KIX as we move towards increasing engagements and collaborations with countries and education stakeholders in the 68 countries supported by the Global Partnership for Education. Next slide, please. So as stated by Trisha earlier on, the 4 KIX regional hubs will continue to facilitate direct knowledge exchange. To achieve this, the hubs will embark on defining mechanisms that are important for exchanging this knowledge between countries. The focus for year 2, therefore, is to increase country and inter-country engagements through outreach and knowledge mobilization activities. To do this, the hub will invite countries to participate in a series of activities, for example, regional conferences and workshops, webinars, capacity strengthening workshops, inter-country visits and meetings. Participation in these activities will be along the various thematic areas, as well as clusters of countries, either in sub-regions or along shared priorities. In terms of who will participate, countries have been requested to nominate a national delegation with up to 5 members. This will be a link between the hub and the member countries. Some countries have already completed the process of identifying this national delegation and have forwarded the names of the 5 national representatives to the hubs. I remember participating in Kenya's meeting back in May, and one of the agenda was nomination of KIX national delegation. I must say the process was quite participatory, with several organizations in Kenya showing interest in being part of the KIX hub. We are therefore encouraging all countries that are yet to complete this process to do so that hubs can begin national and cross-country collaborations. And finally, on regional hubs, in addition to convening countries for meetings, hubs are also going to focus on production of knowledge resources, for example, fact sheets and podcasts that analyze country policies and innovations. Next slide, please. On global projects, Trisha gave a nice summary of the focus of the 12 global grants. In terms of priorities, just like the regional hubs, KIX global projects continue to work in the targeted countries. The focus going forward for all projects is to establish meaningful connections to education systems and stakeholders. The priority, therefore, will be to engage governments to ensure public ownership of projects and explore how impact from the projects could be scaled to different contexts. And as we do this, KIX as a program, we continue to facilitate ongoing connections within and among global grants, while also providing support to projects as they continue adapting to challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. On research on scaling, I think Trisha mentioned earlier briefly, KIX is funding a research on scaling project that is explicitly about generating lessons around scaling. Research on scaling project is working with KIX projects, currently with the global projects, to build capacity and to increase understanding of how to scale positive impact for education. Brookings, the institution in charge of this project, has just completed the selection of the first cohort of global grants projects to take place in the action research. There are two upcoming activities to watch out for from Brookings. The first one is going to be a fast scaling workshop with KIX grantees, and the second one is going to be complementary research on an area which we have limited knowledge in, and this area is to investigate scaling from the perspective of national education stakeholders. Next slide, please. As we all understand, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought some unforeseen risks and challenges in the execution of projects, including the KIX global projects. The pandemic is already producing knock-on effects at the community level and international level and on the education sector, as seen in the closure of schools. My colleague Shem from ADEA spoke about the COVID-19 Observatory. So upcoming activities for the KIX COVID-19 Observatory will focus on collecting, synthesizing, and mobilizing information about COVID-19 policy responses in primary and secondary education across countries. This will then be followed by dissemination of the collected information. And this dissemination will be through various ways, including policy briefs, webinars, and fact sheets. In addition to the COVID-19 Observatory, and as I had mentioned earlier, the priority of KIX as a program is to continue facilitating joint reflection on the possible course of action for all projects during and post-COVID-19. Next slide, please. So the digital platform, I think Trish mentioned briefly about it earlier as well. So the KIX digital platform is a public-facing website, knowledge repository, and collaborative space for KIX partners and key stakeholders. So the next step for the digital platform is to complete the peer learning and exchange portal so that KIX partners and countries can start collaborating in e-discussions and meetings and to co-create resources for knowledge sharing. These resources include policy briefs, include presentations and reports, videos and audio recordings, and many more. And these resources are what is going to form a digital library. And just to reiterate that education stakeholders will be encouraged to submit resources for the library. So look out for the request to submit these resources. Next slide, please. Lastly, on all the 4 regional calls for proposals are out, with 1 call closed and 3 still open. The closed call is for the EAP region, and we still have 3 calls still open. So the last quarter of the year will be busy with the selection of projects. This selection will be conducted on a rolling basis. It is anticipated that the selection process will end late in the year, and work in the countries is set to begin early 2021. We therefore urge GPE member countries and education stakeholders in the regions to look out for public announcements for selected projects as we continue to encourage meaningful connections between countries and encourage stakeholders in the region and the selected projects. As I wind up, I would like to reiterate that my colleague Tiffany mentioned earlier that this is the first KIX Symposium. We therefore plan to conduct more events like this as we continue sharing insights from the hubs and from projects in the months and years ahead on different platforms. Thank you for listening. Next, I would like to introduce my colleague from GPE, Ian Mcpherson, to give closing remarks. Ian is the lead for the Knowledge and Innovation Exchange at the GPE Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy, and greetings to everybody. So I have the privilege of offering some closing remarks to this year's KIX Symposium, as Joy mentioned, the first, but certainly not the last of its kind. Firstly, thank you to all of our colleagues and panelists from the IDRC, from the GPE, our KIX partners, ADEA, UNICEF, FitEd, our grantees for their inputs and the rich panel discussion on COVID-19. Secondly, I'd like to use the 4 principles of KIX that Trish mentioned to provide some reflections that we would like to leave you with. The first principle is around being country-driven. Responding to nationally defined priorities is the North Star of KIX, and it shapes everything that we do. Not only is KIX supporting governments to create and implement the knowledge agenda, as mentioned by Jean in his opening remarks, but as mentioned by Alice in hers, this past year, has been operationally focused, which was necessary for KIX to have the credibility and the legitimacy to address nationally defined priorities in a really fulsome way. The second principle was around allocating funding through fair, transparent, and competitive processes. As reflected in the global grants and the upcoming regional calls, we aim to provide funding to further develop good work that established partners are already doing, but also to surface new partners with different approaches, all on the basis of merit and relevance. And in this way, KIX aims to thicken the knowledge ecosystem that governments and national policymakers can be part of. The third principle is around being adaptive and responsive. We are clearly in unprecedented times. As illustrated on the COVID panel, moderated by Florencio, KIX, along with so many other institutions, organizations, and bureaucracies, aims to be as nimble, as light-footed, and as responsive to country needs as possible. Our biggest challenge is not so much how do we respond, but how can we do so in a way that doesn't add to the noise, but based on comparative advantage, adds value to the demands and the needs of national governments. And the fourth principle is for KIX to complement and reinforce other GPE mechanisms and practices. As Alice mentioned earlier, last week the GPE Board of Directors approved the new strategic plan outline. Transforming education is at the heart of this plan, and indeed, transforming education is the new strapline for GPE. The next task is to elaborate the strategy outline and to think through how that manifests in changes to the GPE operating model and its approach to monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And KIX will have a very important role to play in this. So bringing all of this together then is my last point. Given these principles and reflections, given the operational advances made to date, given the unprecedented times that we are all living through, how can we collectively work better in the service of national governments and country-driven priorities? What are the needs and what are the opportunities? KIX is deliberately and purposefully designed to be adaptive, and we are always interested to hear ideas and suggestions of how to further this agenda. With that, and on behalf of all who participated in making inputs today, thank you all for joining. If it is relevant, as Joy mentioned just prior, please consider applying for the regional grants that remain open, the 3 that are open. And regardless of that, please do sign up to the KIX bulletin through the GPE website. Thank you again, and we wish you all a positive and safe rest of your days.